So optical storage is another type of storage, and the way it works is if you think this is typically used for things like CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays. Okay, and the way it often works is with these things called lands and pits. So if you can imagine a pit's like a divot, and a land is like the level, all right, or peaks and troughs, but they're called lands and pits. And you can imagine a laser could be shining down on this, okay, shining down, and you could tell by the time it takes to reflect back whether it's hitting a land or a pit. Okay, now this is how it can read as 1 or 0, because again it's got two states. Is it a land or is it a pit when this laser is shining down? So it's got one track that starts in the middle of the disc and then goes out like that, where this data would be written. There are different types. Okay, so there's this thing called a dual layer. Let me get my pen. I'll try and explain the dual layer to you. So if you imagine you've got one layer of pits and lands like this, a dual layer is having another one underneath. Okay, and the way it works is they will change a setting on the laser to determine whether it hits the first layer or it passes straight through the first layer and reads the second layer. Okay, and that's what a dual layer means. So if you get a dual layer DVD or CD, it holds twice the storage as a single layer, and it works by changing the setting on the laser to read 2 layers deep instead of 1. It doesn't mean it's back to front. Okay, lots of misconception with dual layer is they just think there's stuff written on that side and there's stuff written on the other side. That's double-sided. That's not the same thing. All right, you can actually get double-sided optical storage, but it's not that common. Dual layer is quite common now. You also get rewritable ones. So rewritable ones, instead of having physical lands and pits, because you've probably seen you can get things like CD-RWs, DVD-RWs, which means you can put data onto the discs and then you can change the data on the disc. Well, you can't do that with lands and pits. You don't go around filling in the pits. The way rewritables work is they actually use a dye. They use a coloured dye that reflects the laser back differently. So it's a dye that can have one of two colours. The laser can not only change the colour of the dye by pressing a setting and focusing on the dye, it can change its colour. Alternatively, if you're reading from it, it can read what the colour is because one will absorb more of the laser, therefore reflecting less back, etc., etc. So use dye in a rewritable one. You use the lands and pits in the normal ones, and you understand what dual layer is. So these are found in CDs, DVDs, and Blu-rays, and the benefit of them is they're incredibly cheap and they're easy for distribution. So they're becoming more outdated now because lots of stuff is distributed on the internet, because we can say with quite a lot of confidence that most people have a good internet connection. Before this was the case, this was the way that most things were distributed. So you used to go into shops and buy software like Microsoft Word and things on CDs. You don't really do that now. You can just download it on the internet. All right, but this is optical storage. To give you a couple of examples, because it's developed over the years to store more and more information on, we still see it in terms of physical media for things like computer games. While they're still on discs, they might not be in the future, but they are at the minute. So computer games, they're in Blu-ray form, or you could see DVDs and Blu-rays for films, compact disc CDs for music. And the reason being is the capacity. So CDs were the first ones that are around, and they typically store about 800 megabytes. Then as technologies come on, the same sort of thing can be done on a more microscopic level and some slightly different techniques. I mean, we can suddenly store for DVDs up to about 9 gig. All right, they're technically 4.5 gigabytes, but then you've got dual layer. Most DVDs are dual layer, so that gets to you typically about 9 gigabytes. Then Blu-rays, again, typically about 25 gigabytes, but then if it's dual layer, you're looking at about 50 gig on a Blu-ray, which is an incredible amount of data when you compare it to its CD counterpart that is still the same type of storage. So optical storage can go anywhere from about 800 meg to about 50 gigabytes.